Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of G&G Live. This is where we get a couple of attorneys on the horn and get to talk through some of the things that we do and kind of pull back the curtain on the legal business landscape. Today, as you can probably guess, we're covering client contracts, a common feature of many businesses in many different industries, and kind of the do's and the don'ts and the red flags. Of what we see and what we don't want to see. I'm joined by our attorneys, Rebecca Lyon and our founder, Michelle Green, who are going to present this wonderful presentation today. I'm Ian Zaderholm. I'm the office manager. I don't have a whole lot to say there. Just a quick disclaimer, as always, before we get going, that this presentation is just for educational purposes only. It's not going to be tailored to any specific business, and especially as laws change, we can't guarantee the accuracy of this information. Watching this video doesn't create an attorney-client relationship between anybody and G&G law, and therefore there's also no attorney-client confidentiality. And with that out of the way, I'm gonna get to the good stuff. Let Michelle and Rebecca take it away.
All right, thanks, Ian. Thanks so much. We have a lot to say about client contracts, so I'm going to jump right into it. So first of all, client contracts, what are they? It's a contract outlining the services or products to be provided. It includes payment terms and other important protections. It's sometimes called different things. So it's often called a terms and conditions page, especially if you're an online business or if you just attach terms and conditions to a quote. For services businesses, it's often called a services agreement or a master services agreement, which we're trying to move away from, or an MSA. And even for health and wellness practitioners, we have a package. We've worked with a ton of them, and their client contracts are their patient forms. One of the big questions I get from potential clients is it necessary to have a client contract? Is it necessary to have an attorney write to client contract? And after entity formation, because it can encompass so much of your business, a client contract is the best way to protect you and your business. So first thing we always say, make sure you have that liability protection in place, an LLC or a corporation. That's the entity formation. Then the client contract is usually second on the priority list. Key terms to include, we'll go over that in depth, but it's the scope of the services that'll be provided, how to get paid, your intellectual property protections, liability protections, that type of things. So jump into questions for Rebecca. So first question, Rebecca, who needs a client contract?
Yeah, good question. It varies a lot, but for the most part, it's going to be service-based businesses because those types of relationships tend to be ongoing, and because the services need to be clearly laid out.
Ooh, I'm clicking through and it's not going.
Oh no.
Oh wait, it went too far. There we go.
Hey, okay. So for some examples of like the kind of service-based businesses that I'm talking about, there will be consultants, which can encompass a lot, but in general, most consultants for their work need the client to cooperate with them to provide them information and access to their business. And that can be addressed in a contract. There are personal trainers and yoga instructors and similar professionals who have concerns about liability and setting client expectations. There are people who coordinate events or who work at events, like makeup artists, who might want to spell out what happens if they can't make it to the event or if the client cancels the event, which we saw a lot of in the past year. And makeup artists, especially, and other artists will want language protecting their tools and things like that. So, for example, we've in the past included a fee, like an instant fee if someone touched the artist's makeup kit, because that means it's contaminated and she really can't use it. So until she's been able to decontaminate it and all that stuff. So the nice part about that is that it can help avoid court and things like that, because there's just an instant fee that's attached to those kinds of situations.
And I love that because it's something I never would have thought about, about
Right.
what you would need to include in the contract until you have the conversations that we always have and say, what's the biggest issue in your business? So that was
Yeah.
smart
Like,
to
what are
figure
your
it out.
biggest worries?
Mhm.
Yeah. And then there's construction another example. They will want to have contracts because they're very regulated in what they need to provide the client. They need to give them certain information and disclosures and things like that. And most of that can be addressed in a contract.
Mhm. Yeah. It's always, people ask me a lot like, oh, what kind of businesses, what kind of clients do you work with? And it's hard to answer because it really runs the gamut of tons of consultants, but also there's construction, there's production companies, there's wedding planners, there's conference planners, we've had 2 clients that do balloon designs.
Yep.
So there's so many different types of businesses out there, and almost all of them need to have contracts in place.
Yeah, definitely.
So next question for you, how can a custom contract help a business?
Well, so there are a lot of reasons why a custom contract is important, but I'll try to summarize it in like a top 4 kind of, I think. So the first one would be protecting your business. That's the big one, right? So a contract can have liability terms and terms to protect your intellectual property. It can address what's important to you. And then number 2 would be making sure your business runs smoothly. It can lay out your process, and it can help you weed out problem clients too a little bit as you share your contract with clients if they're pushing back on weird things or things that are really important to you. Maybe you know that you're not going to be able to move forward with this person. And that in particular is an area where customization is key in describing your service. And number 3, it can be important to make sure you get paid, which is another very important thing. It can put payment processes in place. It can have language allowing you to stop work if payments are late, and other self remedies like that can also help you avoid court. Although having a contract is also good if you have to go to court. So benefits on all sides. And then the 4th is actually kind of professionalism. Not, I mean, it's not possible for everybody, but in general, it looks good to have your own contract. It shows a sense of professionalism to your clients, and sometimes clients come to us because their client has actually requested their contract.
It's another one of those steps of, especially for people just starting out, it makes you feel like you have a real business now.
Yeah.
When you have your contract in place, and you do have a real business, so you should represent that to your clients. Yeah. Those are all great reasons. And then from a big picture standpoint, I just love the fact that we've helped clients go through this process to figure out their processes, make them really clear in a contract, make sure they're getting paid on time, getting paid easily, reducing administrative hassles, weeding out the problem clients before they turn into big problem clients that cause litigation. And all of that type of stuff is, that's not, you didn't start a business in order to deal with administrative fires and hassles every single day. So having these processes, this contract in place can really help you be able to focus on the fun parts, like the actual services that you provide, the reason that you started a business, which is one of my favorite things.
Yep.
So highly recommend customize your client contract to your business. Know what it says. We've had so many people who have pulled contracts from LegalZoom or their past job, and they have their client sign it, but they actually have never read it thoroughly, or they don't follow the processes. They don't know what it says. Make sure that you know what it says and that you follow what it says. That's what's going to help you.
Yep.
So Rebecca, what are some important contract terms to include?
Yeah, so there are lots of terms and they vary a lot, but I'll try to run through some of the big ones because, yeah, businesses vary. But in general, names of the parties is important, and making sure you use your business name in particular, especially if you have the LLC or corporation, for that liability protection, because contracting through your business is how you get that protection. So very important to do that.
Yeah, it seems so obvious, but we've seen it wrong so many times.
Yep.
The name.
Yeah, and like including the LLC and the Corp or Inc. at the end is all important. Yeah, and we see that one like you said, we see people get that one. We see people not doing that. That's a big one. Termination, who can terminate and how, if the relationship isn't working out for some reason, or, just in general, sometimes clients can't pay anymore, things like that. But termination, scope of the services, a description of the services, the process, and things like that. And then the client responsibilities too, what the contractor, construction person, consultant, whatever they need from the client to perform their services is important.
Graphic
Payment
design,
terms.
if you need
Yes.
some images.
Oh yeah.
Yep.
Absolutely. A lot of different companies will need clients to work with them along the way. Payment terms, when payment happens and how to handle non-payment or late payment, invoices, and approval processes so that clients don't come back way down the line claiming that they never approved an invoice or they dispute the invoice later. We see that a lot when clients don't want to pay. Intellectual property, who owns what, confidentiality, liability protection, how to handle disputes like mediation, arbitration, and those kinds of things. And then there are a lot of boilerplate terms which are included in every contract, but can be very important, like how to modify the contract and things like that.
Yeah. If there is a dispute, where do you solve the problem? If
Yes.
you're based in Illinois, you want to make sure that's in Illinois.
Yes.
Great. So some examples of that you've been through, what can be solved with client contracts?
Yeah, we've seen lots of problems come up, but I'll try to give some examples from the perspective of a couple different types of companies. So a big one that we see a lot, so software consultants, for example, and this applies to a lot of people, but sort of as an example.
Yeah, so like web developers or software consultants writing code, that type of thing. Yeah,
exactly. So the first problem that we see would be preventing scope creep, because a lot of clients will be, will be saying stuff like, hey, can we just add this in? Or, can we just tweak this? And it's really easy to let that keep happening. And suddenly you're not getting paid more, but you're doing a lot more work. So there are a couple ways to address that. The big one would be to use one overarching contract that has all of the legal provisions in it. So that IP protection, liability protection, all of that. And then have statements of work, work orders, whatever you want to call them, that will describe the actual services so that you can just enter into new statements of work or updated statements of work as the services change, and you can change the price as that happens.
Yeah.
And then you don't have to enter into all of the legal terms every time you do that. So it's easier to do.
Yeah, and we found that especially helpful for our clients who are really big companies, like or institutions like universities or public companies. So if you send a contract over to one of those organizations, they have to send the contract to legal. And that always is a long process if you know anything about attorneys.
Yes, a very long process. A week for them to respond to everything that you send, and they come back with lots of changes, and so having what consultants often call master services agreement or having a primary agreement, it can make it easy to add on new work, new projects, get paid for more stuff without going through those hassles. Yes, exactly. And then the one alternative that we've also found to be helpful sometimes would be to make the contract into sort of terms and conditions, like you'll see those printed on the backs of invoices sometimes, or things like that. Things that are easy to attach to like whatever proposal or whatever you usually send to a client. And the nice part about that is a lot of industries sometimes get intimidated by the big contracts. We have several clients in industries that believe more in like handshake deals and things like that, which can get into a lot of trouble. But they don't like contracts, but they actually don't really blink at terms and conditions. So sometimes that can be helpful too, is just setting it up as terms and conditions.
Yeah. So good options for preventing scope creep.
Yes, absolutely. And then another problem that we see is ownership of intellectual property. It's important to identify who the owner is, and usually it's kind of understood that most of the work ends up being the client's, but it's really important not to end up in a situation where the consultant can't reuse things that they need to be able to reuse. You rarely want to give 100% ownership, all of the rights over to the client for everything, because there will be things that you want, your processes, your templates, all of those kinds of things. Most people need to be able to reuse. So that's a problem to address, absolutely, in the contract. It's that ownership of intellectual property.
Yeah, and that does come up with software consultants a lot, because we say when you write code,
Yep.
that's intense to write code. Do you write fresh new code for every single client? And they say, oh, no, no, no. So you don't want to, if you're using that code over and over again, you don't want to give it away. So that's good to make clear in intellectual property section. But even for consultants that have like presentations that they use or PowerPoint templates that they use, make sure that you're protecting that if you're going to use it over and over again.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that ownership of intellectual property. And then another problem is actually protecting the intellectual property in other ways. So a lot can rest on confidentiality. There are a lot of things sometimes that consultants that in the software industry especially wouldn't want their competitors to know. You don't want everyone to be able to have access to all of the code that you've developed and all of the processes you've put in place and everything like that. And so confidentiality can be an important thing to address to protect intellectual property. And then a big problem actually in a lot of industries, so software consultants, but I think probably most clients that I see, is a lack of client responsiveness. And the problem is that, sometimes deadlines or things like that the consultant feels obligated to stick to. And it's really just not possible if you don't get the client input that you need or the client information that you need. So it's very important to address that problem in the contract by making sure that it says that the services are dependent on the client answering those questions, giving you the information you need, and all of that, and what happens if they don't, and how to address those situations, which can be a big one for avoiding court and other situations like that.
Yeah. Don't want to not having a breach of contract because you can't meet deadlines, but it's not your fault. You can't meet the deadline. So that client responsiveness is really important to make clear.
Yeah, absolutely. And then the last problem that I'll go through for a software consultant would be, again, one that we see in a lot of industries, but the situation is awful and the relationship just isn't working. This one actually, a good example from a client who's an event planner. Her client kept demanding things that just weren't possible. She kept was contacting her all times of the day, things like that. And she started getting very rude in her emails and communications, and the relationship just wasn't working out. In all industries, the customer is not always right. So it's very important to make sure you can get out of the contract. So addressing that kind of problem in the contract is very important as well. Those termination terms are very important. So that's an example.
That problem a lot after the fact.
Yes. Yeah.
We don't know how many times we've prevented that problem, but probably a lot.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. That negotiation process in the beginning is important. That contract. And then on another side, a construction company, just to kind of give a contrast, their biggest problems are probably liability for one, because construction is a very risky business.
Yes.
On all fronts, employment and things like that. But with clients, one of the things we can address in the contract is, the client understands and accepts the risks involved, especially if they want to be showing up to a site undergoing construction to check on it and things like that. And making sure that the contract says that they'll be careful when they're there and things like that.
Yeah, it's really important for construction, but we also talk about it as the first priority for people in like yoga practitioners or personal trainers, or anybody who deals with children, so has children courses. And that liability component is key.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, we have one client who actually has to like drive kids. And so that's a big one for sure. Yeah, so liability. And then the other big one that I see really prevalent in the construction industry is getting paid.
Yes.
So this is a big issue for everyone. Everywhere in every industry, there are clients who don't want to pay or who can't pay. But we see in the construction industry, and it's really an especially big issue in industries where the contractor or consultant will be buying supplies or hiring workers to do the job because they've got a lot of expenses. So getting paid is important, and some ways to address that in the contract would be finding ways to get paid in advance, getting at least some of the payments in advance, getting work product approved when it's first provided.
Oh no, you cut out a little bit, Rebecca, but I'm going to add to that while we wait for you to come back that the construction industry is kind of frustrating because there is this sort of sense that if problems occur, they'll just take them to court. So these problems just always seem to blow up to be these $100,000 problems, and then they take each other to court, and they're spending more time and money on resolving their issues when they could be spending more time on actually the construction services and have good contracts from the get-go. Ian, should we pause this for a second? All right, we had a little technical difficulty, but we're back with more tips about construction contracts.
Yes, sorry about that. So yeah, construction contracts, in terms of getting paid, the other big thing that can help in a contract would be making sure that the client is given everything that they're legally entitled to. Otherwise, that could preclude payment. Clients need to be given estimates before the construction starts work. They have to be given certain language if the construction company wants to be able to get a mechanics lien later. All of these things are very important. We actually had a construction client realize he needed to come to us because he had a friend go to litigation because the client wasn't paying. And it turns out he did not give the client some of the information that they needed before starting work. And by law, he had to provide it. So he did not get paid for that job, which is awful. So on the other hand, we've had construction clients that have used our contracts and then get mechanics liens, we're able to get paid and all of that. So very important.
Yeah, these are the clients that I tell them I save them millions of dollars and they don't even know it. We obviously don't know that for sure.
Yep.
Awesome. So yeah, good problems and solutions, things we can solve. Yeah. Oh yeah, here's a really nice piece of feedback. We got this like a year after we drafted this person's contract. And he sent this really, really nice note that he wanted to thank us because we added a timeline constraint for disputing invoices, just like Rebecca had mentioned in the payment terms. So we said, invoices have to be approved. We often say invoices are automatically approved after a certain amount of time period. And he said, this has given me so much reassurance after the 7-day period is over that they won't then go back and dispute the work and, have a reason for not paying. So that's really nice feedback.
Yeah, that's awesome.
All right. So if somebody goes to write a client contract, how should you go about writing it?
Yeah, well, there are a few don'ts. So don't just start drafting. And a big one that I know is hard is don't just pull a template from the internet or from a previous employer or another company. And that's important because the template that you find might have completely different processes than what you would do, than how you would handle a situation. So for example, maybe you are a software developer and the sample you use is from a large company and that company describes its cybersecurity process to its clients and it talks about all the steps it takes to keep information secure. and they are way beyond what is reasonable for a small business. And you're suddenly accidentally bound to these processes because you took a contract from a larger company. And there are some smaller examples or things that you might not notice in the contract that can happen as well. That's sort of like a big example, but you could be accidentally breaching whatever contract you use and not know it.
Yes.
It might
So you
not
pull a
have.
contract, you don't follow what it says, then you're in breach of contract. So that
Yeah.
means somebody could sue you.
Yeah, exactly. And then on the other hand, it might not have the language to protect the important parts of your business. So maybe it doesn't have that language saying that the client has to work with you to provide you the information and you're late on a deadline and you're in breach or something like that. It might not have all the protective language that you want. But then on the other hand, honestly, maybe it's just so consultant or contractor friendly that it's good for you, but it's off-putting to your clients. You give it to the client, like, what is this? So it's important to have a contract that's really tailored to your business. So to do that, the first step is actually to determine your goals, what you want this contract to do, what you want your company to look like. And then write out your business process, highlight the sticking points, and think about major risks involved and how to mitigate them. We talked about a lot of problems above. Those are good examples, but they vary a lot by industry. So for example, if an event planner is on their way to an event and the car breaks down and they're late to the event, what would happen there? Or what if you create ads and a client gives you a logo to include in the ad? What happens if you get sued by another company because it turns out their logo is violating some other company's intellectual property and you put it in the ad? And lots of different things. Or if someone passes out and hits their head when you're training them in a gym, it varies by industry.
Yeah. And I loved what you pointed out before too at the beginning about the makeup artist who is like, my kit is my life. And if there are children around while I'm doing somebody's makeup, I am terrified. Please help me with this problem.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's a very industry specific thing, and it's important to look at what can go wrong at each step of the process. And then once you've kind of laid all that out, figured all that out, you want to make sure that the contract encompasses all of that and how to address all of those situations. So it should lay out your processes and your services, how to mitigate those risks that can come up, and then all the other terms we talked about in the beginning, like who the parties are and confidentiality and all of that.
All right. So that's the process.
Yeah.
But what is our process? And the feedback that we always get from clients is, I was so overwhelmed and you made it so easy. Rebecca was amazing and comforting. So how do you do it? What's your magic, Rebecca?
Oh, it's so sweet when we get positive feedback like that. So our process would be to use a questionnaire and a client call to help guide the client through that prioritization process, through walking through their services. So we kind of help them go step by step to help make it less overwhelming. We help them figure out what they would want each section to say. We kind of know what to look for, where to issues, and we listen to them when they, like with the makeup artist kit, we listen to what their biggest concerns are, and then I actually get a lot of questions on what industry standards are. So we can definitely help with that, but honestly, in most cases, they tend to vary a little bit. And then once we've gone through talking it out process and all of that, we write the first draft and we send it to the client. Then we have another discussion. So we run through the contract. We ensure that each provision says what they want it to say. And we educate people on what each section means and empower them to work with the contract, so that they can follow the processes in the contract. They can explain the contract to their clients, and they can make little changes as they come up, tweak the payment sections and things like that. And so once we've had that after the contract call, we'll send the final contract template, and it's ready to go. And then the client can use their contract template with all of their clients, and just fill in the important sections for each client.
Yeah. I love that. And we make it as easy as possible to work with, because especially from my perspective, I go through the sales process because I own a business too. And I know how important that easy sales process is to a successful business. So it's making sure the contract is protecting you, and then also making sure it's easy to work with and that you can explain it. I love that you educate and empower our clients, Rebecca, the business owners, so that they can really speak to what the contract says with their own clients.
Yep. Yeah, absolutely.
What are our fees for client contracts? And I can take this one. So our mission at G&G Law is to make legal services accessible to small businesses. So we charge flat fees as much as possible, which is what we like to do when we draft client contracts for our clients, is to charge flat fees. So our flat fee includes exactly the process that Rebecca outlined. So we draft a client contract template, we make 2 rounds of changes, and then we have that discussion with our clients to educate and empower them to use the contract. It doesn't include negotiations with clients, that's extra, but we're happy to expand the scope to include negotiations too. So for a customized client contract template, which is in a non-regulated industry, so just, basic like consultant, marketing consultant, like the makeup artist we talked about, or a wedding planner, or a conference event planner, that type of thing, our flat fee is $2,200. The fee varies a little bit though, depending on if it's a regulated industry. So essentially, if there's a law about your industry, probably the price will be a little bit more. So definitely the construction industry or health or wellness or the medical industries, then it might be a little bit more, but that's the base rate. Next question for Rebecca. Do you have to hire a lawyer to write a contract? This is like an SEO of a search engine optimization question. It came up all the time, so I put it here.
Yeah. I understand that it's not always the top priority. Like you said, the top priority is forming the LLC or the entity that's going to protect you, but I do strongly recommend it. We've had clients use templates before we drafted their contracts and had them have various issues with the templates that they've used. We've had a contractor that was unable to get, in the construction industry, that was unable to get a mechanics lien on a property because he didn't provide the information that he needed to give the client in order to follow the steps under the Mechanics Lien Act. We've had clients that didn't know or understand what their contract said, and because a lot of those templates have a lot of legalese and they're painful for even us to get through. We've had a client who actually, before he came to us, was using a contract, and he wound up doing over $100,000 worth of work that he didn't get paid for, because the contract didn't have good terms about stopping work if there was non-payment or making sure that they were getting paid along the way. And it was, I strongly recommend it because a lot of those situations can come up.
Yeah.
Don't work with a lawyer.
Yeah. I would say always, eventually, yes, you should have a lawyer to write your contract. I would say in terms of prioritization, first step is getting that entity in place for protection. And then sometimes I have potential clients come and say, I'm bootstrapping, I have hardly any budget to start. And my first 2 clients are people that I've already worked with, and we have an understanding about the relationship. It's just little projects to get my feet wet. And I say, okay, maybe get those processes in place, but eventually you do want to have a lawyer write your contract. And then it has the added bonus. We love taking this project on because it really helps us as a law firm and attorneys get to know you and your business really, really well from the get-go. And then all of our legal services from that point on, we can be more efficient because we have this really deep understanding and this basis to work from. And we know that, from the core of your business, you're working with this really good contract. So the next question, when should you hire a lawyer to write your contract? And I already touched on this a little bit. So eventually, always you should have a lawyer help you to write your contract. Oftentimes, it's when clients who are bootstrapping and have a very, very low budget to start their business, they come to us when they reached a success point where clients are coming in. So behind that circle of trust. So beyond that friends of friends clients. And sometimes a little problem makes them realize, okay, it's time to update the contracts. Now I have a good idea of how my business works. I know where the problems are. Help me figure this out and put it into a contract. Other times, and this is probably the majority, is that clients want a contract and should have a contract from the get-go when they're just starting a business. So, if you're risk averse and you want to just make sure that you don't have a lot of worries and fires from the get-go, or if you do have high-end or enterprise clients from the get-go, like if you are contracting with public companies or universities, those are your types of clients, then you should have a lawyer work on your contract from the beginning. If you need the protection of that, it's good protection. And it also is good from a business standpoint, like Rebecca mentioned earlier. It shows that you're a professional, that you are a real business.
Yeah. And if I can jump in really quick.
Absolutely.
And if you don't have a contract, a lot of those high-end clients will have one for you. That's we've seen a lot of them have contracts that they give to all of their service providers, and they're not tailored at all, and they don't make sense, and they're usually pretty awful for the service provider. So it can help you from that standpoint too, especially with those bigger clients.
It's so much better for your business to be able to be the one to give the contract from the get-go and work on begin negotiations from your own terms. Yeah. And sometimes people want contracts. I think you mentioned this earlier too, Rebecca, that the business's client requests a contract, and then obviously you should have the lawyer draft it.
Yeah.
Well, that is it. Thank you so much, everybody, for watching. Thank you, Rebecca, for sharing your amazing knowledge. I mean, can we quantify how many contracts you've worked on? Probably hundreds.
Yeah, I have no idea. Way up there, yeah.
So many. So we have a lot of different ways to, we know the standard terms for so many industries, and we feel so comfortable with customizing it for different businesses.
Yeah, my favorite projects.
Yeah, it's your favorite. You always say that.
Yep.
It is fun.
Yep.
So if you want Rebecca to draft your client contract, reach out to us. Go to our website, fill out our contact form. We'll set up a consultation, and we would love to help your business.
Yeah, that's great, wonderful information, you two. As always, it's fascinating just to listen and just hear the legal reasoning bandying back and forth. Like Michelle said, get in touch if you have a client contract that you'd like worked on, or if you think that you might. If you have like even just a little inkling, we can talk it out. If you have any questions, this is a pre-recorded video to work with our schedules, so we won't be able to take questions live, but just drop them in the comments below. We'll see them and we'll answer them right away. I'll also be linking some resources down there as well. So that's all that we got. Wonderful presentation, everybody. I hope you enjoyed it out there on the interwebs, and have a wonderful Friday afternoon and a great weekend.